We're going where you want to go so you can be where you need to be. It's Road Gang Radio with Lindsay, Lawler, and Jimmy Mack on RadioNemo.com.
Man, I got to tell you, Lindsay, I love having this guy on, don't you?
So good. Well, because, he's not only smart, he's cool. And I love a smart, cool balance. Jim, you're smart and cool.
I appreciate that. I can be a little bit of a nerd sometimes, though.
Yeah, but sometimes that's cool. I mean, Scott Shea can be a little bit of a nerd sometimes when it comes to music. And by the way, that's cool.
It is,
am I right?
absolutely.
Or am I right? I know that I'm right.
Normally I would tell you if I had a guest on the show, we had a guest on the show, you had a guest on the show, I would tell you just type in their name and you'd be surprised at how many times they would come up in regards to Road Gang Radio. If you type Scott Shea in on Spotify, though, you might make a point of putting in Road Gang Radio on there because, man, typing in Scott Shea on Spotify gives you a whole lot of Scott Shea, as you could probably imagine, a whole lot of content, information, a lot of playlist stuff. By the way, he's been the producer. He is the producer of Seize the Day with Gus Lloyd on the Catholic Channel on, yes, Sirius XM since 2012. He's been with those guys for quite some time. We are so thrilled to have him here this morning. He is a music journalist extraordinaire. He is the author of one of my favorite books about rock and roll I've ever read, one of the Mamas and the Papas, that is just so good. I want you guys to go to scottsheaauthor.com and check out all that he has to offer there to try to kind of give his whole bio in regards to music history, Lindsay. It would be the segment, and it would be a history of rock and roll as well. And he's slowly building one as well. He's got a great article out right now with Strange Brew. He's been writing these for a while, and each one is an in-depth, deep dive into one particular, nuance of rock and roll history, whether it's Van Morrison or the Monterey Pop Festival. It's our absolute pleasure to welcome back to the show our good friend Scott Shea. How are you doing on this Halloween Eve?
Hey guys, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. Appreciate the kind words.
We always, and we're not kind people, so that means we actually do like
we're
you,
not.
Scott. Just to be clear.
So just tell my teenage daughter that you think I'm cool.
Okay, I will. Give her my number. Listen, you send me your teenage daughter, I'll send you my 6-year-old, and we'll just all have a moment of madness in our own right.
You got it.
So Scott, the article part 2 is out now over at the Strange Brew, and it's great. And we are talking about the Hawks later to become the band, Bob Dylan's band. But I just wanted to back up real quick because I was curious in your opinion. Bob, let's talk about the voice for a moment. Bob Dylan's voice is of course forever debated, not traditionally beautiful, but of course unmistakably
right.
Expressive. But if of course, if you didn't know the songs and you just heard the voice take us back, to the 60s all of a sudden, or, just all of a sudden heard it, you might be confused. So I'm just curious to start off in your research and your opinion, when did the engine really turn over for Dylan? What moment shifted him from this polarizing folk singer to one of the greatest artists of our time?
I would think that what I wrote about, when he decided to go electric, that just, people were so into Dylan. He was, and he was an acquired taste, but once you got that taste, it's like coffee or beer. It's like you just become way into it, almost enamored with it, follower of it. And they went where he went, and Bob was a bit of a provocateur, and it's always when you look at Bob, you're like, is he really that way? Was he really social? Did he really believe all these protest things and social left-leaning things he sang about because he just dropped it like a hot potato? And I don't think anybody ever really knew the real Bob Dylan. I don't even know if Bob Dylan knows the real Bob Dylan, but where he went, people followed, and this was like his first real branching out, and and he dragged his audience into the modern rock scene, kind of kicking and screaming, and it was controversial, and he lost a lot of them. I think a lot of them eventually came back, as the 60s turned into the 70s and the singer-songwriter movement, and they realized, hey, full band arrangements aren't really that bad, and this was it. But he did it really kind of in your face, in a bit of an antagonistic way if you were one of those folk purists who went to see Bob just to boo. you know?
Yeah. So what you're saying, I just want to hear, because I know reading the article, but you're saying even as you think as it pertains to the voice, when he added electric, that shifted. I mean, I know it shifted him vocally, of course, but you think that's the moment when the world woke up?
Yeah, because that's when he became a pop star. You know, he started having hits. He got to know was more known to the masses, to teenagers who probably didn't really buy folk records. Bobby Robertson in his book talks about how when even at these shows where they're getting booed, whenever they would close with Like a Rolling Stone, and all the girls would come running up to the front, the young teenage girls, So it just opened him up just en masse to the public, and he had a fair, like, maybe 4 or 5 hits, in the top 40 during that period. So yeah, that's definitely the time that he just got turned on, and people, I think, were accepted his voice and his style.
Let me ask you something else, too, because what ends up happening throughout the 60s, and, there have been some movies that have kind of covered this to some degree, but you've talked about this at length with the Monterey Pop Festival, is the collapse of genre, the idea that literally things began crossing, I guess, boundaries. I guess, if there's a country of folk, there's a country of rock, there's a country of, international music, and things really start to accelerate. And how much of, that wanderlust, Cash has it as well, too, the idea that I want to be me as opposed to being my genre. And like Lindsay and I have talked about that at length on many occasions, the idea that it's like, I don't want to exist in a formula. I want to exist in the formula that I have concocted. And, and is there anybody outside of folk? I mean, who does he have a pull point? And that's the kind of follow-up question, and then we'll get to the article. But are there 1 or 2 people to point to that say, hey, Bob, the water's really nice over here. You might want to jump into this pool with us. Is there anybody that really pulls him there, or is he a sui generis sort of just, spiritual wanderer looking for the next location?
Oh, it's definitely the Beatles played a big part in that, because I think the Beatles went from this kind of kitschy British invasion to more serious, almost kind of like imitating the folk rock move that followed them with, Rubber Soul and Revolver. And also the Rolling Stones. I think Bob was a Rolling Stones fan. The Rolling Stones were a British invasion group, but they were different in that they did a lot of blues covers, like Bob did. There's a great picture I reference in the second part of my article of him at a record shop in Greenwich Village with Ramblin' Jack Elliott and John Sebastian on either side of him, and he's looking at the Rolling Stones American debut album. And when you look on that record, you got songs by like Ronnie Hawkins and Muddy Waters and a couple others, and Bob was doing those songs as well. And these guys are doing them in full band arrangements, just kind of growling, the Mick Jagger's vocal style. And I think those guys, those artists, probably more than anybody, helped Bob make this decision. And and then also maybe the Byrds too, and John Sebastian with the Love and Spoonful. They kind of started the whole folk rock thing. And it's like, and they're taking his songs. I mean, the Turtles have, the Byrds with Mr. Tambourine Man. The Turtles are doing "It Ain't Me, Babe" and a few others, and they're having big hits with them. And I think Bob's like, well, I'm the author of those. I can do this too. And that's why I think he went searching for a group to back him, and ended up with the Hawks, who later became the band.
We're talking with Scott Shea, a renowned historian. I just want to mention, speaking of the Turtles, we just recently lost Mark Volman, who actually was married to one of my very dear friends, Emily Volman. And so I would love to actually have you back one time, because the more and more I learn about Mark, even posthumously, my mind is sort of blown. He was one of the greatest writers. His catalog is insane. So if you would, I would love to have you back just to dive into the Mark Volman catalog.
Love the Turtles.
Okay, fine. Flo and oh my gosh, yeah. So we'll get back to that. But Scott, as a solo artist myself, I've always admired, and honestly, if I have one regret, it's that I didn't. If I could go back, I would do it again with the band. Still honestly, time. Still time. That's true.
Yeah, right.
I move a little slower on stage, but yes, there's still time. But the artists that come up with the band from their ground floor. Now, Bob's got sort of two separate ground floors here, but there is a chemistry that comes only from growing a sound together, of course. So Dylan's early work is obviously genius, but bringing in that band, bringing in the Hawks, it would you say? I mean, it made him a better musician, yes. Are there things that you think, new places that they took him that he could not have gone alone? I know that's sort of an obvious yes answer, but I just want to explore the places, sort of what would have happened if he didn't have it versus having it.
Well, yeah, especially Robbie Robertson. He and Robbie became really close, and Robbie was even by that time. I mean, he's only like 24, 25 years old, but he's one of the most accomplished and admired guitarists in contemporary rock and roll. Even though they don't really have a label, they recorded like 2 singles that just kind of went nowhere, but they were known. It's like when they were rehearsing for the way it started was Bob hired Levon Helm, the drummer of the Hawks, and Robbie to play with him at his first 2 concerts, Forest Hills and the Hollywood Bowl, after he did the whole Newport thing. And Mike Bloomfield was there too, and he was afraid to. They recorded a couple sessions together, and Bloomfield, who's like one of the greatest guitarists of that era, Electric Flag and all that stuff, he was afraid to play in front of Robbie. He was intimidated by him, and I think he influenced him. And I hear what you say with the band, and when if you go back and you look at that footage on No Direction Home, the film shot by D.A. Pennebaker of the European tour. Like, Bob is just like totally into being with the band. Like, he's with them at all times. He's backstage. It's not like he's got his own dressing room and the band has theirs. I mean, maybe they did, but like, he was always with them, and he's back there. And it was a source of, I think, comfort for him, and camaraderie to get through this gamut, where they're going out, they're playing this, they're making this incredible music that we look back on now and say, this is great. But it was so foreign to these people, and they just hated it. They just came out to want to hate it, which was, and that's just, even if you're, Bob Dylan had nerves of steel, and he was a great leader for these guys in that moment, which I think endeared him to them. He was part of the band. It's like, and he'd never really been in one before. I know, he played with Bobby V's band for a short time in the late 50s or early 60s, when he was coming up. But he was in there with him for just like a cup of coffee, and so I think it's kind of fulfilled something that he'd always wanted, like you said, playing in a band and having that camaraderie. And it's fun to just watch and see him just have a good time with them, and be self-deprecating, just kind of laughing through the pain and the stress of what they're going through together.
Laughing through the pain, every musician's story.
Scott,
yeah.
I wanted to kind of give people a chance, because we really dropped our listeners into the middle of an in media res here. I wanted to kind of give you a chance to kind of unpack the Hawks, so that our listeners understand how the Hawks become the band. And by the way,
right.
My follow-up question to that is, are you thinking about writing a book about this whole gang? Because I just feel like there was more details I wanted to know about Helm, and it's the first kind of. And I love Robbie Robertson as a performer and as a stage presence. I just wanted to know more about him. I mean, him walking down Beale Street and being like, "Wow," is great.
Yeah.
But can you kind of talk about the Hawks as I guess as an institution?
Well, I'll answer your second question. I don't plan on writing about him, because Robbie Robertson's book is so incredibly thorough, and it's just like he really puts you in almost moment by moment. So I don't even think I could compete with that, but maybe one day, I don't know. But the band, the Hawks were Ronnie Hawkins' backing band. Ronnie Hawkins was a singer from Arkansas, a real crazy, wild guy. Who had hits in the late 50s with 40 Days and Mary Lou. They were a couple of old blues covers. One was Chuck Berry song. One was a Young Jesse song. And he was from Arkansas, and he formed his band with a bunch of Arkansas guys. And Levon Helm was one of the original members, the drummer. And they emigrated to Toronto. They got like a real following up in Toronto, and through a guy named Harold Kudlitz, who was a promoter up there. And, one by one, guys started dropping out and being replaced. And, by 1961, they had this lineup of, Levon was still with him on drums. Robbie Robertson was the guitarist. Richard Manuel was on piano. Rick Danko on bass. And then they brought in Garth Hudson on organ. And these are all local Toronto guys. And that is the core of that is the band. They became the band. And then and they played with Robbie for a couple of years that way, and then they kind of got tired of him and his antics, and just as they wanted to branch out on their own because they were just kind of growing. Robbie wanted to stick with rockabilly, or Ronnie, I'm sorry, wanted to stick with rockabilly, which was just kind of going out of fashion, and these guys were into like Motown and Curtis Mayfield and a lot of the blues guys from the late 50s, and Ronnie wasn't. So they just eventually broke away from him and formed their own band. That's when they hooked up with Dylan, around 65. That's when they joined him on that tour, and there was a little bit of turmoil. Levon got a little bit disenchanted, and he left. But after the tour, they all kind of reconvened in Woodstock after Bob had his motorcycle accident. Bob Dylan had his motorcycle accident, and it was laid up in bed for several weeks and convalescing in Woodstock, New York. And that's when the band moved up there, and they bought a house, a big pink house that they would rehearse in. They set up a makeshift studio in the basement, and then Bob would come over and record with them, which led to what we now refer to affectionately as the basement tapes. And then the band got a record deal from Bob's manager, Albert Grossman, and they changed their name to the band, and they gave us just like this whole new style of back to roots rock and roll in the midst of the psychedelic era. And really kind of brought everybody down from that psychedelic high and back to just regular good old rock and roll. And, two guitars, bass and drums, and songwriting, and really kind of gave us what we refer to now as the singer-songwriter movement. So they were a big part of rock and roll history.
Is that moment when they changed, I was going to ask you, at what point did the Hawks stop being Dylan's band and become the band with a capital B? Is it that moment when they changed the name? Do you think that was sort of taking ownership of their own identity and legacy then?
Yeah, it was after they recorded most of the sessions for their album, and they're like, this music sounds like nothing we've ever done before. Like if you go back and there's bootlegs of them playing live in like 64, and they have a couple singles out, and there's some unreleased stuff from that time that's come out, and it sounded nothing like that. It sounded like nothing that's had ever been released before by anybody. And they're like, this new music that we're making, we need to have a new name. And they just called themselves the band because when they were on tour with Dylan, that's how everybody would refer to them. And in both positive and negative ways. Bob would introduce them as the band, and people, people around Bob say, you got to dump this band. They're ruining your music, So they just kind of took maybe like a negative and turned it into made a lemonade out of lemons, and gave themselves just the basic the band, and it's stuck.
I got to tell you, I mean, just from a kind of perspective view, who could they ever have believed the journey would actually end up him having a star-studded documentary, final farewell concert made by a man that would become one of America's greatest living filmmakers? I don't think any of them could have actually predicted. I mean, there are people who have a sense of where they're going. I can't believe for a minute that anybody in the band thought it would play out the way that it did. It's a wild story of where their destination is, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And, as awesome as that is now, it was really a lot of sadness in that moment because Robbie Robertson Robbie was like a lot of the guys back in those days. He smoked dope and I'm sure he probably dropped LSD a few times, but he never got into like hard drugs. He's pretty sober. Even when you look at, videos or pictures of him back then, he always seems like just kind of like a straight, sober guy. And a lot of the other guys, with the exception of Garth, he and Garth Hudson were ever sober. But the other guys kind of got into, the hard drugs and drinking and stuff like that. And it just, Lindsay's talking about the camaraderie of being in a band and coming up together. But, there's the reverse of that, which is, a lot of the ego and the heartbreak that comes once you do get big, and it certainly claimed Richard and Levon and Rick Danko, and it just got too much. Robbie was really carrying that group. He was their principal songwriter. He was the one getting everybody to the sessions, keeping everybody straight. Trying to get it's like herding mice. And but they had this incredible concert, just loaded with stars that they had known over the years, that they got to know. Van Morrison was there. Jimmy and I have talked about that performance before by Van Morrison in The Last Waltz, and Neil Diamond was there, who Robbie was producing at the time, and Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Ronnie Hawkins came. It's maybe arguably the best rock and roll documentary of all time, and having Martin Scorsese directed, which he was still a relative unknown at the time. I think made it even better because the guy is just one heck of a filmmaker.
Yeah, and talking about drugs, sorry, Jim, but the think about just the peer pressure of being in a band too. Like, even if maybe you're like, I'm not going to drink tonight, and then but the band is there. Okay, I guess I am. Like, there is a real peer pressure with that band to not make good decisions, because now your own choices are led by other people's as well. And there's
especially when you're that age, you're in your 20s, and easily guided, and do things that aren't good for your health, and it costs you in the long run, but in the moment, you're not thinking that way.
How many times have I said I'm not going to drink tonight, and then the guitar player hands me a shot? I'm like, okay. So much. Anyway.
I'm going to tell you guys, though. You've given me a little insight, because if you watch that movie, I just realized something, because we talked about the Van Morrison moment. If you go back and watch that moment when he leaves the stage, every single member of the band looks like a bunch of old souls, except for Robertson, who just has the enthusiasm of a kid. And I never even thought about that before. The rest, Helm looks like he has been to Helm and back, and he had been. And there's Robertson being like, Van the man. He's just absolutely ebullient, because he's, I didn't realize that he's like the kid in the middle of all these worn down, beat up old men who have just basically ravaged themselves over the course of a decade.
They're all in their early to mid 30s, and they look like they're, in their 50s. It's like, geez, guys. But if you could have that one back, I'm sure they would,
Yeah, and there's Robertson looking as young as he ever did. Just looking,
handsome guy, just having a good time.
Yeah, crazy. I lost Lindsay for a second. Lindsay, unmute yourself.
Sorry, I have to bring up, this is a separate conversation, but I have to bring up We Are the World, because I rewatched that documentary recently. Mm-hmm. And have you seen it, the documentary behind it?
I have, yeah, it was great. I enjoyed it.
So good. I rewatched it recently, and it becomes a very heartwarming moment of collaboration when you see Bob Dylan's anxiety and reluctance during it. But I'm so curious, because just imagine being back to The Voice again, not being one of the most well-known creative artists of all time, but now you're standing with Stevie Wonder and Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson and these some of the greatest voices of all time, and then he's there. What I don't know time. That was 1985, so we'd already have obviously been way into the band. I just want to bring that up and get your thoughts on that. Putting Bob Dylan is one thing on his own, but then he's another thing standing beside Stevie and Lionel and Michael. I just would love your thoughts on that scene.
Well, yeah, it was really wild, and for me, it was an incredible act of humility on Bob's part, because he was really kind of failing delivering his lines, and so Stevie Wonder comes over, and Stevie is like a great impersonator. He can impersonate a lot of singers, and he can impersonate Bob, So he does his impersonation of Bob and gives him an idea of what he should sound like, and it just opens up Bob's mind, and he's like, oh, okay, I can do this, and they got it done, and my respect for Lionel Richie really went up. As not necessarily as a host of American Idol, but as a musician, because he really spearheaded that thing and kept everybody in line and kept everyone in order, and just got through this thing, which was almost like an impossible task. Yeah, except for Waylon. Waylon was like, I can't. And the funny thing is, Waylon gets bashed, but Waylon was just, he was just recently sober and clean, and you could see he was sweating, sweating like a monster. And I think he's just like, I got to get out of it. I can't handle this. I got to get out of here. So, so I think that was his motivation there.
Too many egos will drive you to drink, and if you can't have the drink, that's a rough one. That's
for
a
sure.
rough one.
Absolutely. So and Quincy Jones, keeping everybody getting through that whole session. And one of my things I thought was the coolest was I'm a big Daryl Hall and John Oates fan, and to see that those guys were like all into soul music coming up in Motown. And could you imagine being Daryl Hall and having Diana Ross come up and ask for your autograph? I mean, that had to be like mind blowing.
Scott, I have the funniest story. I haven't told Lindsay this either. I used to work as my former partner and I in law enforcement actually went over and worked as disciplinarians at this middle school, and we became very close friends with a lot of the teachers there. There was an African-American gentleman I worked with who literally burst into tears of shock when he found out that Daryl Hall and that Hall and Oates were in fact white. He was actually stunned, Lindsay. He was like, wait, what? And like me and my partner Ed are like, no, you don't understand, man. It's like, I don't believe you. We made him go on the internet to watch a video, and he's like, I don't understand.
Wow.
I don't know what I'm...
Even that whole time, he had never seen a picture of
He had never seen them. He was a young guy. He was like, he just started his teaching career. He was 24 years old, and he grew up loving Hall & Oates and had never, this is a while back, he had never seen a picture of them. And
crazy.
It's a great reminder of the crossover. Wheels on Fire. Bob Dylan hires a band and changes rock and roll. Part 1 from The Strange Brew. And of course, Lindsay, who is the author of that remarkable article?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. It's our friend, music historian and author Scott Shea, who so wonderfully has joined us once again. And this is something that's becoming a habit, and it's a habit that we like having you around, Scott. So thanks for making the time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed speaking with you guys. It's always a blast.